guys, we are 2 minutes late because I'm a dunce and get caught up in amazing conversations with friends when I have them on my channel. And Ptahmassu is admittedly a new, but still absolutely wonderful friend and support. I am so excited to have him on here. But as per usual, when I launch my streams, I have to go into a bunch of mini announcements and things, you know, stuff that's going on in the channel. I'm sure that those of you who are in my Discord know that on Thanksgiving morning, I awoke to the most wonderful thing anybody could ask for on a holiday, which is my water heater decided to, for lack of a better way to put it, blow up. The bottom of it sprung a leak that gushed like a bathroom, like bathtub faucet, and it was awful. And there was between a quarter and a half an inch of water, depending on where you were standing in my basement, flooded everywhere. My walls got damaged, my trim got damaged, my kitchen is screwed, like the carpet was completely soaked through. We had animals in that room that we had to rapidly relocate. We literally woke up to that. That was my good morning Thanksgiving. So my husband had to go rapidly run out to the spigot, for lack of a better way to put it, the water control valve for my house and turn it off because we could not find the valve that turned it off just to the water heater. So we had to have no water until about 6 p.m. when the people, like 5, 6 or so, when the people that we called at 11 a.m. when we found the leak finally were able to send somebody out because it was a holiday. So that has been my joy, has been dealing with insurance and packing up the entirety of the second floor of my house and hauling it into my garage and making room for that, which the guys mostly have handled physically. I've been fielding calls from insurance and dealing with mitigation. It has been a nightmare. We have dehumidifiers, like 5 of them downstairs right now that have been working since Friday afternoon. We had to get a new water heater, which we paid for out of pocket. I am not asking for community monetary support though, because the insurance more or less has assured me that more than likely they're going to be covering pretty much all the repairs. This was definitely a sudden flood. We have the kind of insurance that covers that. Our deductible's pretty dang low. So more or less we had to pay out of pocket for the new water heater, but we are financially fine. As far as we know, the insurance so far is covering pretty much everything. So I'm not asking for anything from you guys. I'm just letting you know this is why I didn't have a video this week. It's one of the big reasons. The other big reason, of course, being something that I want to make clear we are not going to be talking about on the stream, which is a whole shitstorm, for lack of a better way to put it. Thank you, YouTube. Press F to pay respects for the monetization for this video. That has been generated on social media regarding my last live stream. Those of you who are here for it know why it's happening. Those of you who weren't, you don't need to waste your time on it. I've already responded publicly in at least 2 different forums to all of the accusations. I'm not going to talk about it again. If somebody brings it up in the live chat outside of just this warning, mods already have instructions on how to handle that. I'm not dealing with drama. My guest is not here to talk about it. We're not talking about it. We're here to talk about something that is much more joyous and much more wonderful. So, on the subject of art, before we transition into allowing my lovely guest to introduce himself, there's also the issue of the calendar project. People keep asking me, hey, when's the Kickstarter going up? What's going on with that? As soon as we have at least half of the images, including the cover image, done, finished, like colored and not just sketches, that is when I'm going to be putting up the Kickstarter for it, just because I want to make sure that enough of the calendar is done that even if I had to use the sketches for the other half, that I could still publish something for you all. Because, you know, the way the holidays happen and everything, we're hoping to get it out by mid-January. People have asked me about prices. Me and my artist have settled on $50 for the physical, $35 for the PDF, so I can compensate them fairly. And there will be an option if you want to order more than one. There will be an add-on for the physical calendar. Obviously, you can't put an add-on for PDF because I'm not password locking it or anything. So I'm trusting you all to respect the incredible amount of effort that my artist has put into creating the images that were created for this calendar and not share it around publicly if you do happen to pre-order the PDF. We are hoping that if we can get at least 26 orders, which there are enough people just on the Discord server that were interested, that it will make enough money back to break even on the project. If we can get at least 35 orders, that puts enough that I can start making investments in the same artist doing some more work for the 2023 calendar. So if you guys are interested in that, Kickstarter should be up probably by the middle of the month. I've been told that because I've paid them in full, my artist is focusing all of their efforts on getting all of that art done. But I'm not going to put it up there until I know for a fact I can deliver something to you guys that I have enough done to guarantee that that will happen. So that's what's going on with that. People keep asking me about it. I figured I'd just address it live, get it out of the way. So now that I've successfully ignored my guest for 5 minutes, let's talk about why we're here and who he is. So Ptahmassu and I ultimately connected officially. We've been following each other for a while, but we connected officially because of the work that I did recently, and that he also did recently for a big summit called the Polytheism Today and Tomorrow, which was put on by the Indic Academy, which I know there's some controversy around that. I'm looking into that, guys. That's not something we're here to talk about either. Like, it's not, okay? When I got involved with them, it was because a friend of mine asked me to, and because of the fact that I believed in the message that I was talking about, which regarded latent Christianity. Ptahmassu loved the work that I did so much that he reached out, and we connected and talked for over 7 hours, which neither of us expected. So, like, a sort of fast and, like, heavy, rapid friendship has formed as a result of this. He's an incredible comedic iconographer. I've never seen anybody do quite the kind of work that he does, like literally gilding gold onto these have like raised reliefs that are activated and everything. I'm going to let him introduce himself and talk about it, but the work that he does, if you have not seen it, links are in the description to all of his stuff. He's got a book coming out. We're going to talk about that toward the end, but his work is just mind-blowingly stunning and very clearly divine inspired. So with that very glowy recommendation from a friend out of the way, and the acknowledgement that there was indeed a $20 sugar daddy super chat that happened at the beginning of this, that I love you to death, Akeda, and thank you so much for your conversation about Goddess, but I'm still going to keep insisting that if you guys want to donate, as always, super chat questions are going to be prioritized, but we are going to engage with the chat. We will be watching it, like, for questions and things, or at least I will. Like, feel free to ask all kinds of questions. The focus for this stream is not drama. It's not BS. It is art, and it is the incredible work that my guest has done. So with that in mind, and that rambly, glowing recommendation and 7 minutes of monologuing, welcome, Ptahmassu. Tell us a bit about who you are.
Thank you so much. I just want to thank your community and thank you for your friendship. Thank you for the dialogues that we've been having, which are amazing. And it's definitely a pleasure. It's always a pleasure to talk about my work, but even more pleasure to share that work with people who love the gods, which is what my life is. I don't think I can give myself a more glowing introduction than what you did, but I will just say a few words about myself and try to keep it succinct, because I really actually don't like talking about myself. If you said talk about the gods, we'd be here for a number of years, but talk about myself, it's very difficult. So a comedic iconographer is a description that I created for myself because it didn't exist. Comedicism, as some people on the server may know, comedicism is a contemporary term for people who practice the Kemetic or ancient Egyptian religious traditions. So because primarily the iconography that I do is Kemetic within that tradition, I've called myself a Kemetic iconographer, but I do other images for deities in other traditions. I have been commissioned to do cult images for other temples and other shrines. So it is something that I'm open to, though primarily my specialty and where I really stand in my element is with Kemetic iconography. So that is, being a Kemetic iconographer is a term that I've just given myself until something better comes along. I am a legally ordained priest in the Temple of Isis. Temple of Isis is a California-based nonprofit 501c3 religious educational organization with priests and priestesses not only in California, but also in other places in the United States and even internationally, because the Temple of Isis is affiliated with the Fellowship of Isis. The Fellowship of Isis is a broad religious, multicultural, multi-religious organization dedicated to goddess traditions generally, under the umbrella of the worship of the Egyptian goddess Isis, and founded by Lady Olivia Robertson. So I am also ordained in the Fellowship of Isis by the founder as a priest and a priest hierophant. But Temple of Isis is where my legal ordination as a priest of Isis came from. And I want to make clear that none of my comments and none of the things that I'm representing are officially endorsed by Temple of Isis California or Fellowship of Isis. That these are my own ideas, that the Fellowship of Isis and Temple of Isis are not responsible. I just want to make that clear, that I'm not officially representing them right now.
You're you.
I'm representing my own work and my own ideas. So just to be clear, but I am very proud and very pleased to serve my communities as a priest. I also I studied and was initiated by Native Egyptians. My notes, 1989 to 1994, just making sure, looking at my notes, that I got that right. I studied with the Ammonite Foundation, and I won't go into who they are, but the Ammonite Foundation are basically an Egyptian organization dedicated to the preservation of ancient Egyptian ideas, religion, theology. And the Ammonite Foundation are very, very controversial, and they are no longer active if you look for them online, they're no longer active really in any visible way. So obviously when I studied with them, that was quite a long time ago when they were still very active. But so I did receive initiation from Native Egyptians and training from Egyptians in theology, in the ancient Egyptian language, and also in iconography, which is something I have carried over some of that training into my work that I do. And
we just got really fast. We just got a $10 super chat. Thank you so much, Jelly Bean. I've gotten into carving sacred symbols into rocks, many religions. More power to you guys.
Oh, wow. That's fantastic. I just published a book the day before yesterday, which we'll talk about later, called Sacred Verses. And it's an initiatic work. And it's devotional poetry at its outermost level, but that has many inner levels for those people who are
you are
interested
cutting
in
out a little
Muses.
bit. Give it a second. I think your net needs to catch up.
Oh,
there we go. You're back to normal.
Okay, I'm sorry about that. I live in the middle of nowhere. I live in the very middle of the desert, and sometimes there are internet issues. So please let me know if there are those issues. So where was I?
You were in the middle of saying that it was an initiatory devotional poetry, but there are additional layers, and then it cut.
Yes, for those people who are interested in mystery traditions and the experience of walking with the gods in an initiatic context, Sacred Verses is very much about those experiences from my point of view, having experienced initiation at the levels that Sacred Verses deals with. And so they present as inspirational poetry, as religious poetry, or as sacred poetry. But they are an experience for the reader to dive very deep into their own initiatic experiences with their gods, with their powers, with their spirits. And so that's something that's very much part of my work, is dealing with the experience of initiation, how the gods touch us, how do the gods interact with us, how do they communicate with human beings. And these are the ideas that I present in my book. So,
well, and that gives us a wonderful transition into talking about, I guess, the conversation that kind of led to this week's topic, because this is, we talked several weeks ago about doing this particular interview. It was while I was still undergoing a lot of the electrical work, which there's about 2 days left on that, guys, but we're still waiting on the company to let me know when that's going to happen. So, screw if I know. But while I was in the midst of that was when you and I kind of connected, and we had this wonderful hours-long conversation that we decided to condense into a sort of interview for the benefit of you all, about how art itself, by the very nature of the work, is a conversation with the divine, no matter what your skill level is and whether it is being done for a devotional purpose or not. Now, keep in mind, this is the theological view of two people from two different traditions, and this has to do with us speaking from the perspective of our particular views within our traditions. So, like, this is a conversation that is meant to be beneficial, but it is not a declaration that this is absolutely true no matter who you are, no matter what you believe. You know, there are different views from from other traditions, but from a Hellenic point of view, this is absolutely a very easy claim to justify. And from the conversations I've had with Ptahmassu, same from the Kemetic point of view. Like, the act of creation itself connects us to the gods. And so, given that literally anybody at any skill level can access art, maybe some art may be more difficult for some people depending on their physical capabilities and such. For example, gilding might be very, very difficult to do if you're not as physically strong. But the idea of the act of creation itself, even if that art is fashioned of words, say poetry and writing, versus, you know, picking up a pencil or a pastel or paint or sculpting or anything, you know, knitting, crochet, weaving, there's such a wide swath of things that all fall under the act of creation itself. And the very act of engaging with those things opens a dialogue with the divine in a way that few other activities can match, really, if any. I can't think of one that is, apart from maybe the act of worship itself, standing before the altar, that creates that level of connection. So with that in mind, that was kind of the inspiration for the stream. And by the way, I know that there was a whole bunch of people who submitted artwork. I am going to be showing that off toward the middle of the stream, so stay tuned for that. There is the assumption that everybody who submitted artwork, that it is indeed their artwork that they submitted. So if somebody stole artwork and it wasn't actually theirs, please don't hold me responsible for that. I trusted my community because we built a pretty good one, to be honest about their own work. But I fully believe that everybody who submitted their artwork, that it belongs to them. But we will be showing that off, and I will be talking about each of the pieces and what they said they were. There's some really gorgeous art to show off for you guys. Like, the community really came out. We only gave them a week, and there's some really stunning stuff. So with that in mind, Ptahmassu, let's take it from here, I guess. Let's talk a little bit about where that theory comes from your perspective, because from mine, it has a lot to do with the Muses and what is said about them.
So in the
it is Sacred Verses is available for purchase right now. There's a link to it in the description.
Yes, it is available. The soft cover version is available currently. So in the Kemetic or ancient Egyptian perspective, there's one very important text that we have that actually substantiates, interestingly enough, it really coincides with what you just said. And that is what Egyptologists refer to as the Memphite theology, which comes from a very large rectangular black granite slab called the Shabaka stone, which was produced under the direction of King Shabaka in the 25th dynasty. And this purports to have been copied from a much older document from the Old Kingdom, which deals with how the god Ptah, who is the supreme creator, how he basically thought and felt creation and the gods into being. So his very thoughts, his feelings in his heart became his speech, and his speech manifested everything that exists, including the gods. And that's a huge paraphrasing there, but I just want to be respectful to people who don't have either an academic or theological background in ancient Egyptian religion, because it can be very complex. But basically, this shows us something very important, at least the type of thinking that was going on in Egypt at the time that the Shabaka stone was produced. And that is that thought and feeling are divine, because in the Shabaka text, the thoughts of Ptah become the gods and become creation. And so it shows us that the Egyptians recognized that thinking and feeling were sacred, that they manifest the gods, and that they are directly connected to the gods. And this is a very, very powerful piece of theology. Naturally, for me, this has huge ramifications. Firstly, I'm dedicated to Ptah. I'm named after him. He is my patron deity. Ptah is the patron of all artists, of all craftspeople. anyone who does anything in the arts from a comedic point of view, the god Pita is there. He's directing, and he's inspiring your thoughts. He's inspiring your feelings. And so art, which there is no ancient Egyptian word for art. We have specific words for activities, but there is nothing that corresponds exactly to our contemporary Western notion of what art is. Art being self-expression of an artist, how they view the world, how they view their experience. The Egyptians did
Well, I
not
mean,
have.
some of the greatest, well, some of in antiquity, most of the greatest works of art that we would honor in museums to this day were functional pieces, right?
Mhm.
Like, you have these, a lot of the stunning pottery, like the amphorae, were some of them were for display, but the vast majority of them were storage jars, like that. There's also like wine casks and like wine pouring vessels and such. Like, they're absolutely gorgeous artwork, and most of them were purchased by wealthier households for that purpose. But
Mhm.
these were purposeful art forms, in the same way that you might get a matching set of plates, or a matching set of, or you might have like a really decorative, old chest or something that you store your stuff in. A lot of this artwork was meant to honor the gods, and was meant to also be very functional, because these two things were seamless. There was no anything without the gods in the ancient mindset.
Exactly. And in ancient Egyptian society, there was no separation between religious experience and daily life. It did not exist. Every single level of Egyptian life revolved around the gods, around serving the gods, around also the ancestor cults, which were very significant to the Egyptians. But from the common people all the way up to the pharaoh, to the king, the our the relationship that humanity has with the gods, and the interactions between the numinous, or the realm of the gods, and the realm of human beings, that was very blurred. There was no hard line in ancient Egypt between the sacred and profane. There were ideas of purity that were very substantial. But as far as a belief that there was a division between the realm of the gods and the realm of human beings, this did not exist in ancient Egypt. The gods and human beings were constantly mingling, and everything in Egyptian life was geared towards the service of the gods. That's the world they lived in. That was their worldview. So all of the objects and things that we see in museums that we call art, the Egyptians would never have looked upon these things in the way that we do today, as being expressions of self, expressions of our own experience, as objects to hang on a wall, objects to put on a pedestal and just look at them and enjoy them. That did not exist in ancient Egypt.
Apparently, you have a
Everything
very
had.
excited fan.
Oh, it is me. It's Ptahmassu. I am here in the flesh. This is me. All authentic. No fake parts. No plastic surgery, no fake parts. Not that I have anything against plastic surgery, but this is all me. It's all the real me. I'm not a hologram. Um, in ancient Egypt, we have a few words. We have hemut, which means skill, or the craft of a sculptor. We have hemu, which means to be skillful, and to be skilled. We have hamu'u, which is the word for a craftsman, somebody who's skilled in something to do. We have hemut, which is the collective of craftsmen, or artisans, if you will. And then we have hamui, which is the work that you do with your hands. But we don't have any concepts that are translated exactly into the way that we think of art today. Uh, Everything in ancient Egypt, images had to do with what academically is called cult or cultist, which is just how you approach the gods. It's a framework for what you do for the gods. And in fact, they also had no word that corresponds to religion. Everything has to do with what you do for the gods. So the term that is most often used in cultic texts is iri ichet, which means to do things, to do something. We also have terms like nara, which means what is normal, a cultic procedure, how you actually should approach the gods? What are the right actions that you do? But we don't have any word that corresponds with the word religion. But all of these objects that you're seeing in museums, most of them that you see are cult objects. They're objects that were created with a specific purpose for ritual engagement, how the realm of the gods and the ancestors and even demons, how we navigate those relationships. What do we do physically to access the gods and access that world? And for the Egyptians, that is what art was for. It was for accessing the realm of the gods, the realm of the blessed dead, the realm of the ancestors, how we actually open that door. And that's what cult images are for. And it's what I do. It's what my entire profession, my entire life is creating images that allow us to approach the gods. They're in a physical, tangible way. Because
well, and
normally,
there's also a belief specifically in Chemeticism, which there's a kind of similar mirror belief in Hellenic theology, in that there was a belief that the gods, there was a statue in the inner sanctum of certain temples in which the gods were said to reside more or less full time, but simultaneously with each other, because it was said that the gods fled certain statues when a city was conquered.
right.
Or when the central fire, Hestia's central fire, was polluted somehow, where that had to be purified, because fire and seawater are the two kind of main cleansing agents in Hellenic thought, in ancient Hellenic thought. Now, keep in mind, when I'm talking about Hellenism, I'm talking specifically about generally classical Athenian and sometimes Hellenistic era Hellenism, which is where a lot of my sources come from. But there was also the belief that the gods visited statues, cult statues on altars, or cult statues within like temples and such, when people offered before them.
Yes.
So
Right. In ancient Egyptian culture, that this is kind of it's a really specialist topic, because Egyptologists themselves, the scholarship, they debate whether or not did the Egyptians actually believe that the Necher, the deity, possessed an image, lived in the image full time, and remained in the temple 24 hours a day, or did the deity ever depart from the image and then return to receive the cultic offerings and the cultus that was given during the daily ritual? This is a huge form of debate Egyptologists are having. My own personal opinion, based on 41 years of study, but more importantly, actual cultic service as a priest and interpreting and translating ancient Egyptian texts for myself, I would say that there's a blurred line there, and that it's not just an either or circumstance. It depends on the temple, it depends on the cult, and it depends on the image. But generally speaking, in an ancient Egyptian context, a cult image is possessed by the deity and inhabited by the deity when the Wenrao ceremony, the mouth opening ritual, is performed and the temple has been consecrated. The deity comes into that image and will live in that image and will receive cult all the time and will not leave that image unless the image is deactivated or the temple is deactivated and destroyed. It's understood that the god has taken up residence in that image, and that the image is the visible manifestation, or ka, of the deity. And that is my practice as an iconographer. That is the stance that I take, that the images I create, that they are visible, tangible manifestations of the gods that they represent. The gods come into the images and possess the image. And as long as the image is receiving cultus, then the god will remain in the image.
Well, and, again, that's such a fascinating sort of point of view because there's a series of rituals and things that you have been taught
Mhm.
that you have to do in a very traditional way in order for that to be possible for your specific work, which is part of the reason why, and we'll talk about this later because,
Mhm.
there's a compensation thing with artists. I ranted about this on Twitter a while back, in part because of a conversation I was having with Ptahmassu about people being particularly like entitled to his work. But there is a massive length of time and a huge process that goes into creating images like this, part of which is cultic and highly specialized labor, in addition to the specialized labor of things like gilding and painting and decorating with precious metals and precious gems and just all of the work that goes into it. But there's also even just doing what one could call, let's say, just normal art, self expression, just writing, say poetry or like drawing or sketching. There is still this active participation of the divine. And this is where I can start to talk about the role of the Mosai, which there were said to be 3 Titan muses. And there were also said to be additional muses, daughters of Zeus. That depending it like the number of them depends on which era and which area you're talking about. There are names that are not typically given with the typical ones that you hear, such as like Calliope and Thalia. But when you are talking about, like, say, the Titan Muses, practice, one of their names effectively translated to practice, this is one of the things that muse is said to be participating in that action alongside you, whether that action is devotional or not. And it is said that one of the muses is said to have inspired all art, regardless of what it's being done for, at all
Mhm.
times. It was said that at no point is there any art that exists on Earth that was not in some way touched by them. So, from a Hellenic point of view, the very act of creating artwork, of setting pen to paper, of, beginning to speak beautiful words, when you read the ancient epics, they start with an allude to the muses. The a lot of the Homeric, like the Homeric hymns do, the like the works and days from Hesiod, sing muses. Like it opens with that. Many plays have interludes where the muses are said to speak. There were offerings that were given to Dionysos, but there's also other deities like Athena, who is said to participate in anything woven or knitted. There was Hephaestus, which had rulership over pottery and metallurgy. There was Hermes, who had authority over messages and the spoken word. Dionysos, who was said to have rulership over plays and comedy and tragedy and like performance. There is an ongoing conversation with the gods going on by the very act of daring to create in the first place, no matter what your skill level is. And it is said that the inspiration that the muses give you is given to you for a particular reason. Now, whether that inspiration is because of your particular skill level or to help you learn or whatever it is, the muses gave you that inspiration, and it is that interaction between you and them to even start the act of creation itself. And that to me is incredible and beautiful and part of the reflection of the ever presence of our gods as pagans/polytheists. It is that inescapability, that inseparability between our lives and the divine that I think is one of the big draws of especially reconstructed polytheist traditions. So I'll let Ptahmassu kind of build on that, but that is one of the things that I wanted to talk a little bit about was even if you're not doing the kind of iconography work or a devotional activity or a votive offering, there is still this ongoing conversation between yourself and the gods. And it can manifest itself sometimes in an incredible state called flow state.
Mm. Absolutely. So everything that you said, I mean, that right there should be in a book. That should be in a book. Absolutely. I would promote that because that everything you said, I mean, that's I think there's a lot of overlapping there between what you said and my own practice. So for myself, for my own personal life as an artist and an iconographer, because there's a difference there, which I could clarify, but let me just say that that all endeavor, all creative endeavor, in my opinion, in my life, is of the gods and goes back to the gods. That is not dependent on skill level, as you were saying. It is not dependent on being trained and considering yourself an expert. It is firstly based on the
It's
intention.
not dependent even on your confidence in yourself and your skill level.
No,
It is not dependent on
absolutely.
how you feel about your creative endeavor. You might be judging it, but that doesn't mean the gods weren't involved.
Absolutely. Absolutely. that the gods are present in our intention to create. Comedically speaking, I would say that the god Ptah, who is the originator of all thought, he is the originator of all feeling, he is the originator of all endeavor that human beings accomplish. He's the creator of that. He's present in that. Whether you are conscious of that or not, all of your actions to bring to fruition what you think and what you feel comes from Ptah. There are other deities involved. Material creation is also governed by the deity of the earth, Tatenen, who the god Ptah is associated with, and then Khanumu or Khanum, the ram-headed deity. He is the molder of all substances, taking the inspiration that you have, which is non-material, and bringing that out into a very, very solid manifestation and form. That right there is divine. So from a comedic point of view, we have to acknowledge that all of our actions come from the gods, that all of our endeavors to create artistically are coming from the gods, that they ultimately deserve credit for that. And I'm very strong in how I feel about that, that it doesn't matter if you consciously are aware that what you're doing is a divine gift, that you can see all of your creative actions, whether it's writing or knitting or gardening, that any skill you have, you can take a look and say, the inspiration for this, that driving force, or that spark of inspiration, I want to create this, I want to plant a beautiful garden, I want to raise food, I want to write a poem. You can say, these come from the gods, and you can offer that action to the gods. Skill has nothing to do with it.
Well, and offering that action is something I've covered extensively on this channel. I know you've seen my video on devotional offerings because I sent it to you. And I've also sent you my video on votive offerings. So for those who are longtime viewers of my channel, I know for a fact that most of you have probably seen those. The votive offering video was one of the most powerful in terms of emotional effect when I was researching it. I talked a little bit about the beginning, but I broke down and cried when I was reading the descriptions of these votive offerings, because they were very dryly written. But then you see things like, you know, a stela that was commemorating that a person had given their bandages to, I don't remember if it was Asclepios or Apollon, but in thanks for healing them. And they took these bandages that were like riddled with infected tissue, and they gave them as an offering to the gods because it was so meaningful to them that they gave that. And like with votive offerings and devotional offerings, a lot of people think that devotional offerings are somehow less than physical offerings that you would give. But I would argue that in the modern day, this is going to be a hot take, and I'm probably going to get clipped out of context for this and attacked and all kinds of things, but this is a fucking hot take, and I'm going to own it. All right. I'm going to even drop an F-bomb. Go ahead, for those of you that are channel members, drop that F-bomb in the chat. I would argue that the most valuable thing that we can give, as the majority of us are in modernized countries that don't have near as much of a struggle for very basic things like food as, say, our predecessors do. I know that not everybody is so fortunate, but a lot of us are. One of the most valuable things that we can give is our time. It is our time, our dedication, and our skill. And I would argue that from that perspective, devotional offerings are incredibly powerful, because it is you consciously choosing, in a Hellenic point of view, usually cleansing yourself as you would before any other ritual, you know, getting your carnips going, like getting yourself cleansed and ready to promote to the gods. And the act of a devotional offering, as opposed to simply creating the artistic work, is that your focus is on that connection to the gods that we just said is there, as opposed to simply creating the work where you may or may not be as aware of it. You might hit flow state and feel that glorious, passionate losing of the self in the presence of, you know, the creation itself. Like the world disappears and you just lose yourself to the act of creation in and of itself and lose yourself to the work. But whether or not you hit that flow state, a devotional offering is where you've separated yourself from the act of creation as the active agent, so to speak, for lack of a better way to put it, and instead focused on the connection you've established to the gods to offer the joy of that connection as your offering to them. You don't necessarily have to offer the product at the end as a votive offering for that devotional act itself and for the attention that you are giving to it and the devotion to the gods inherent in it to still be an offering, because that recognition of Karis, that exchange between you and the gods at that moment, is itself beautiful. And that doesn't also mean what we just said about the gods being involved does not mean that you do not, as the artist, get credit. The gods gave you that thing for a reason, whether it was to develop your artistic skill in that particular place, because you were the best artist to bring that thing into the world, because your interest intersected with the gods at that particular moment. There's a million different reasons why your contribution to that effort is also there. It is simply also acknowledging that the gods are present and are playing a role, which to me, at least as a creator, takes some of the pressure off of me to be absolutely perfect. It takes some of the pressure off of me for all of the complete result of that thing to be entirely like my responsibility, because I know that it is an active dialogue between me and another entity, which means that how it turns out is how it's meant to.
Absolutely. Votive offerings, since you talked about votive offerings are in Cometicism are part of the essential daily conversation of religious engagement. And in ancient Egypt, we have a super abundance, luckily, of material remnants of ex votos, of stelae, of very humble objects, even that people would go and leave and inscribe for the gods. And there's museums are filled with this material. Common Egyptians, average Egyptians, had a very active devotional life with their deities and a very personal interaction with their gods in their homes, as well as going outside temple walls. The temple of the goddess Hathor at Hatshepsut's temple that she created, they have found a great deal of ex voto material that has been left by devotees of the goddess there, that was inscribed by people who were desiring to get pregnant, were desiring to have children, and who had their wishes fulfilled, or decided to come and leave an offering for the goddess as a thank you for having their prayers fulfilled. And Egypt is filled with this type of devotion. It's something that's very vital, that in our daily life, that as we're experiencing the trials of just making it through the day as a human being and trying, that little ways that we can identify our gratitude and our receptivity to our gods and the blessings that the gods are giving us, like pouring out a libation, just pouring out a little pitcher or a little bowl of beer or wine and leaving it in the household shrine, or sprinkling some incense on the charcoal for the deity in the middle of your day and just saying a little prayer. These are powerful moments that are as important as any priestly ritual or formal ritual that we think about. And for myself, I like to extend that type of thinking out to other areas. When I'm washing the dishes, a very mundane, a very dirty job that is certainly not priestly work, and yet when I'm washing the dishes or I'm taking out the trash or I'm doing household chores, I can recite prayers either externally or internally. I can think about the gods. I can offer I can offer my activity, my actions as a rite of love and gratitude to my gods, and give that as a votive offering. And a lot of people might not think that that's pure, or that is ceremonial, but the idea of giving our endeavors to the gods is very ancient, and it is present in every single model of polytheism I've ever studied or encountered. And that includes ancient Greece, that includes Egypt. The idea of our labor, the idea that our mundane activities can become offerings to our gods. All polytheistic cultures have had this. and this is very much part of my own work, and that includes extending the definition of art, that art is not just a fine craft, such as the work that I do, the cult images that I do. That's one form of expression. But like I said, the art of cooking, of arranging an amazing meal and cooking that for your gods, or cooking
Oh,
that
cooking is absolutely art. Cooking is one of my favorite forms of self-expression. Like, to me, when I cook dinner, that is absolutely honoring Hestia. Like, at the center of the hearth, the oven has replaced the hearth fire in many homes, and absolutely that is like art.
Absolutely. Arranging flowers. Okay, for me, fresh flowers. We have an actual temple room, because I have a temple. It's not a public space, but it's a home temple, an entire room that has awakened cult images, and so part of that is the maintenance of the gods in their cult images. So food offerings, the daily ritual every day, and flower offerings are essential, and it's part and parcel of giving an offering to the deity. And so I arrange flowers every single week. I arrange the flowers for all the shrines, and just that act of going to the flower lady and buying the flowers and bringing them home and cutting the packages open and arranging them in their vases, just that little effort right there is part of the offering. That time, that energy, that is an art form. That is something holy. It's something the gods are receiving when I'm doing it, because my heart is saying, I am giving over to you, my gods, this offering. I'm giving to you the life in it. I'm giving to you my endeavor, my time, the money that I just spent on the flowers. All of those things are as important as then going into the temple in a formal ritual and doing the presentation of the flowers with the incense and with all of the formal things that I do. So I like to try and encourage people to think of art as so much more than just handicraft, that all of the other activities that we do, that we dedicate to our gods, can be part of the dialogue of religious engagement and experiencing the gods directly, which is how I try to live my life.
Well, and that's why I stress devotional offerings, Smidge, because to
Mhm.
me, there's a line between devotional offerings, which is
Mhm.
like the activities, and votive offerings, which are the objects. Now, when you're on the subject of votive offerings, one of the most beautiful things about votive offerings is that, especially if you've crafted them yourself, which quite a number of the ones that I have on my altar were not crafted by me. They were found objects. I either found them physically or I found them in a store or something and they called to me. But the collection of votive offerings on my altar, they get used for literally nothing else, because it was said that votive offerings in ancient times, they were left at the temple. You couldn't go back and get that spoon and ladle out your soup with it if you left it there, right?
Right.
So the equivalent of that would be leaving it on the altar, or if it has to come off the altar to make room for something new, breaking it when you are done, to symbolize the fact that it cannot be used for anything else.
Right.
That collection of objects on my altar is itself sort of a living expression of my relationship between myself and the gods. It is a living sort of goddess on my altar, where I can look at these objects that I have collected over time and offered to the gods, and I can remember, oh, that beautiful like candle holder that is in the shape of an owl, I got that after I was sick with celiac for 2 months and finally got my diagnosis, and I gave that in commemoration of and thanks to Athena and to Asclepios for the fact that I finally got that diagnosis, and that suddenly the world opened up and I had education for how to get better. Right? Like, I have that specific thing. I look at that and I remember the joy of that, experience and the thanks that I felt. So when I'm going through, say, the dark night of the soul, when I'm going through harassment, when I'm going through, pain and struggle, I can walk before my altar, and when I give my daily offerings, those objects take on a whole extra layer of meaning, of hope and remembrance and thanksgiving and joy of that length of time. And that is something we have that our ancestors of faith, as it were, those who like worshipped before us, which I'm not saying we're the inheritors of anybody's traditions. What I'm saying is that there were people who came before us in these places. That's something that they might not have had as much with their, like, they had home altars, but they had a temple they could leave these things to. They could walk into that place and see a huge, massive display of their countrymen's, as they were, there's like the members of their city state, the members of their community, their display of the god's powers, like this massive testament to all of these things that were meaningful for every single person who left them. So much so that temples had rooms where they had to destroy these things and dispose of them because there were so many. Like you walk into this room and you just see this massive array of all of these people thanking the gods for these things. We have that on a much more personal level because we don't generally have, most of us don't have a temple anywhere nearby where we can leave these things. And so we have our own altars, our own shrines, our own spaces where we build these dialogues. And if you made it yourself, if you give that votive offering the extra devotional component, you also get the memory of that joyous act of creating that object to commemorate that event. And it adds so much more of a layer to it, which is absolutely beautiful. It is one of those things that, again, polytheism has, that the prohibition on iconography that a lot of monotheist religions have kind of guts from us.
I think everything that you said was really important, but what you just said there is a huge part of the education that I try to do in people who write to me and people who want to engage with my work, is that we have ideas, we have baggage. I mean, we've got more
latent Christianity
than Louis Vuitton's store. We've got latent Christianity, let's just put it. We all know what baggage we're carrying from monotheism. And part of it is the prohibition of images. That images are not representations of the deity, that images represent something that is false, something that should not be worshipped, something that is contrary to divinity, something that's contrary to the creator, something that is anathema to worship and true religion. We've all been taught this. And in the tradition that I come from, images have a very central role to play. The same way that, say, in Sanatana Dharma or Hinduism, murtis or divine images play a very, very central role in Hinduism. And in the ancient Egyptian religious traditions, the Sehemu, the god images that we have, are they're not symbols. They're not representations of something that's more abstract, and so it's a reminder for us. But the cult images that are in temples that have been properly awakened and that have been inhabited by a deity, they are the material manifestation of the deity. The deity is living in these images. Yes, to worship the image, you are worshiping the god. You are worshiping the nature, the deity. And this is, I get a lot of pushback from people who mean very well, but they are coming from all of this baggage that we have about images, and they're wanting me to clarify, well, you're not saying that the image is actually the deity. You're not really worshiping the deity, right? The image is just a representation. It's just a reminder. No, when I open these images, the image of Ptah, the main image we have in our temple that came from Egypt, that was made for our temple, the god Ptah lives in that image. When I'm worshiping that image, I am worshiping the god. There is no distinction. Now, the deity Ptah can be everywhere in creation at the same time, as well as in all the other cult images of him that are awakened. He can be everywhere at the same time. So I'm not saying
the gods don't really work the way that we do.
No, of course not. The gods are not limited. They're not finite. They're not limited by inertia, gravity, mortality. We can't be in more than one place at the same time. But the gods can be everywhere at the same time. And the gods can possess anything that they choose. They can come into any object that they want. And the cult images in temples are one form that a deity chooses to come down in and manifest in and interact with human beings in. But that does not mean that deity is not also present in a larger context outside of that image. Both cases are true. The deity is in the image, and the deity is also existing in a much wider context outside of the image that is numinous. But the image, in coming before the image and in making offerings to the gods through their images, yes, you are speaking directly to the gods. Yes, you are interacting with the gods directly. The gods are not only numinous, the gods are also material. And that is a central thing to Kemetic thought, that the gods are not just disembodied, floating out there somewhere that we can't see. Yes, the gods are numinous, and they are in intangible forms, but the gods are also intangible forms. They also manifest in material forms, and that very much includes cult images, which, from an Egyptian point of view, to call them man-made is not really accurate. It's not accurate at all. It's really a misnomer. Cult images are not man-made. Cult images are a co-creation between the god that is being represented and the hands that are doing it. But the people who are making cult images are being directed and guided by the gods. There is cultic precedence. So there is a framework within the cult that dictates what the god should look like and what the materials should be. And you
Cult
are
here, by the way, since I shouldn't have to remind my audience of this, but I love you guys to death, and we have a few new folks here. Cult here is in the scholarly sense of the word cult. So, cult in this sense means praxis. It means effectively the same thing. It means a specific tradition of practice, not like a cult is in, hey, you need to go figure out whether or not you're going to be built out of your money kind of cult. Like this
right,
is, we're
right.
talking about a set of practices that are unique to a tradition.
Absolutely. In the academic sphere, the word cult is used to recognize or to define the activities that a temple or a community engage in order to reach the gods. So ritual activity is cult. Temples are part of cult. Votive offerings are an act of cult. And I'm using that because if I was just using ancient Egyptian.
Well, there's a really common phrase in modern reconstructed polytheism of hearth cult, which is the practice that one practices at home that is, like your hearth practices do not make you a priest. What they are is they are your home cult. They are your home honoring of the gods, which is, that sort of component doesn't exist in a lot of modern polytheist traditions or a lot of modern not polytheist but monotheist traditions, but the hearth cult or the home cult was essential to a lot of ancient traditions and a lot of modern polytheistic, or insert your name for your specific tradition here, because some don't consider themselves to be polytheist.
And I also want to make a distinction here between what we could say is the common religion or the common religious experience of the masses, and what Egyptologists often refer to as the state religion, or the official religion. In ancient Egypt, temple institutions, which were called the Haut Necher, or the mansion, the residence of the god, temple institutions were not the entire temple was not a public place. It was not a place in which a congregation had access to the actual sanctuary, the Jezeru, the Holy of Holies, where the god, the cult image dwelt. Common people in Egypt did not have access to the Holy of Holies. They did not have access to the innermost parts of the temple. They only had access to the outer courts and to the walls, or temenos, that surrounded the temples. So the daily rituals and a lot of all of the priestly activities, common Egyptians did not have access to any of that, and they did not witness it. Common Egyptians had their own religion, if you will. They had their own shrines in their homes. They had ancestor cultists, and they had very much their own way of engaging the gods outside of official festivals,
Hearth cult.
outside of the daily ritual. Exactly. Average Egyptians would have in the central room of their house, where the families gathered, where they ate, where they took breakfast, where they did all of their mundane activities. They had little niches or little benches where the images of the gods and the ancestors of the family would be placed, and they would make their daily offerings and have their own engagement. And then sometimes when they needed that space, the figures of the gods and the ancestors would be pushed back into a little niche or against the wall, and they would use that space for for other activities. And this is how most normal average Egyptians experienced their religion. They experienced it in the activities of daily life. Whatever they were doing, they would make their prayers to the gods, and then they would follow the official festivals. They'd be able to attend those, and those would be those would be exceptional occasions for religious engagement. But those things were, the state-sponsored religion was not something that average Egyptians had access to. So most of Egypt had their own very personal, familial gods. Their town god, you had your town god, and then you had your family god or gods, and then you had your own family ancestors that you would honor with ex votos and little stelae and things like that.
And you
And
see
so,
something very similar in ancient Hellenic religion as well. There's the Hearth Cult that was expected of all, and you see a lot of that reflected in Works and Days. Like Hesiod's Works and Days talks a lot about agricultural stuff, but it also talks about which days were sacred, and it's where we get a lot of information on the so-called Numenea monthly worship calendar. The, by like the first day being Numenea, it's when the first bit of the moon's light shows after the dark of the moon, which is the scientific new moon. It's generally about 2 days after the scientific new moon. And after that, each day that's counted after that for the monthly calendar, for the lunar calendar, as it were, are sacred to various entities. And we have different, I guess, other than just Works and Days, we have different sourcing for that. We get mentions in things like comedies and tragedies and like the works of philosophers. But every single month, these days were said to be sacred. And if you look at the polis calendar, the city calendar, you look at these festivals. If a festival to Artemis happened, it happened on the 6th day of the month. If a festival to Apollon happened, it happened on the 7th day. You have specific rites, like, for example, a pot of beans was cooked to Apollon on the 7th day every month. That was a household rite that was done. First and last libations were poured to Hestia before any other gods, and after all of the other gods. A bit of olive offerings were given to her. And so you see this Hearth cult. There were also cults that were specific to priesthoods, some of which, I did my video on the Hellenic priesthood, which is just a barely dip your toe in introduction. But there were various priesthoods that did very specific community-oriented things. You had your neighborhood gods, you had your familial gods, and the gods that you said that you were aligned to. There were hero cults as well that you see in Hellenism that were specific. Some of those cults were specific to families. Some of them were specific to certain priesthoods and places. Some of them were polis-wide. And then you have the festivals, the public and the private festivals. Kalenteria and Plinteria were private pieces that set up some of the events that happened at Panathenaia, which was a larger polis festival. I have two super chats that I need to read really quick. We have a question from Akeda Hakobi. Is Ptah a quad omni god? I think that those words mean a slightly different thing when you're talking about theology in polytheism, because omni traits mean something different when you're not talking about the tyranny of monotheism. So we can talk a little bit about that.
I do see I kind of do see an explanation. All powerful, all knowing, everywhere present, all benevolent.
Yeah, so that's omnibenevolent, omnipotent, omniscient, omnipresent.
Right. So this would be a rabbit hole, but I want to acknowledge that because it's important. So a god like Ptah, which Ptah, if we're speaking in historical context, this is where this can get difficult. If we're speaking in a historical context, Ptah is the first, what we can call national god of Egypt. He was the first deity that, at least archaeologically, we can substantiate that his worship was pretty much universal at the very dawn of the Egyptian nation state, which is 3100 BCE, when the unification of Upper and Lower Egypt happened. That Ptah, the worship of Ptah, is that old, and that he became the patron deity of Menufur, or Memphis, the first capital of Egypt, which was about sometime after 3100 BCE, the founding of Memphis, when Egypt really became a unified state. And the god Ptah is the first deity that was really recognized, that archaeologically they can see was recognized not only in one specific location, but became recognized in all of basically the cities and towns where there were temples and shrines. The Ptah is there at the very beginning. So Ptah's characteristics as a deity, this is a difficult thing to determine as far as how far back Ptah's character as a deity is recognized as being a creator god who created everything and created all of the gods and everything in it, because the literature that we have through the chances and accidents of history, unfortunately, all of the major textual sources for Ptah that we have come from the New Kingdom. So come from 1,000 years at least after Ptah had already been worshipped in Egypt. And so we have bits and pieces of epithets. We have things in the pyramid texts, which are the oldest religious texts, one of the oldest religious texts in the world, but one of the oldest religious texts certainly in Egypt. Ptah is mentioned, but we don't have substantiated epithets and hymns to Ptah that have been preserved really before the New Kingdom. So Ptah's character as a deity, as we can determine it from the New Kingdom on, is that Ptah is a deity who creates the material world. He creates the sun, he creates the earth, he creates human beings, he creates animals, and Ptah creates all of the gods. So Ptah is a deity who's responsible for everything that we can see, taste, touch, and also for the spiritual nature, the cause, the essence of the gods and of all living things. Ptah created all of those things. And so all powerful. Deities, Kemetically speaking, have spheres of influence. Gods choose to be specialists, if you will, over specific activities and even over specific regions. And it's not to say that the gods do not extend beyond their main spheres of influence, because they do, but gods tend to specialize. Ptah does have specific areas that he's recognized as being a patron of, but it is recognized that outside of the crafts and arts and sculpting and painting, that Ptah is the originator of everything that exists. In that sense, is Ptah all-powerful? Yes, he is. He's all-powerful. Is he present everywhere? Well, as the creator of everything, there would be something of Ptah in everything that has been created and is created. So in that sense, yes, Ptah could be said to be everywhere. Is Ptah all benevolent? No, he's not all benevolent. Ptah has many aspects. Ptah is a god of war. This is something that people who aren't specialists don't recognize, but Ptah is one of the gods of one of the four branches of the Egyptian military. Ptah is also recognized as being a bull who rampages with sharp horns. That's one of his epithets. He is a war god. He is a destroyer. So Ptah does have a very violent nature sometimes. One of his spouses is Sekhmet, who is the goddess of plague and war, a very destructive goddess. So Ptah has a connection to Sekhmet very strongly as Ptah when he is a god of war. Some of Ptah's epithets are quite bloody when you study them in their original language, which I have, and they're not really known outside of specialist circles. So Ptah, is he all benevolent? No. Sometimes Ptah is very destructive. He is a god of war and sanctions war. These are, and let me clarify that these are ancient epithets. So the gods change and the gods are fluid. And in a modern context, we can say, well, yes, during the New Kingdom, Ptah was thought of as a god of war. Is Ptah still a god of war today? Well, the jury would have to be out on that. I think we live in a different world today, and I think war is experienced in a very different way today than it was thousands of years ago. So Ptah's warlike nature.
Well, actually,
perhaps,
I did a video very similar, because like Ares was
Mhm.
very much seen as like the foot soldier, so to speak, like the
Right.
god of the foot soldier. But I did a video called A Case for Community SPG, where we talk about how those aspects for a lot of folks who are not themselves foot soldiers have translated into sort of a support for extreme battles with mental health and things of that nature. And there's
Absolutely.
historical attestation for this, like with the associations, for example, between what we now understand to be PTSD, but what the Greeks understood to be madness, and like Ares's
Right.
role in that, both in a protective aspect and also in a aggressive aspect. Like he was said to be both most hated among the gods, but also if you were trying to overthrow a tyrant or have a like reasonable civil rebellion, he was there for that too. you know, so like that understanding of Aries has evolved with modern understandings, not because, you know, just UPG, but because of a shared experience of this particular aspect becoming more known to this particular set of worshipers. And so one could say similar things for Ptah.
Absolutely. How I relate to Ptah's bull aspect, how I relate to his war aspect, which is overwhelmingly powerful, is basically in the same way that you just described, that contemporary practitioners do in your tradition, is that I see it, instead of being going to war against other nations, going to war against physical enemies, that this warlike aspect of Ptah can be prayed to and can be embraced as, when we have obstacles that we find are insurmountable, we have things in our life that we are facing that are so difficult and challenging that we need heavy artillery, that Ptah, in this wrathful aspect, can be called upon to do battle for us and to give us the strength to face these challenges that we find overwhelming odds. So absolutely, just like what you expressed. So I hope I answered the question there concerning Ptah. But is there any way that I can answer a question that was, I see from someone else who did ask about a relevant question? Am I allowed to acknowledge that?
Sure, absolutely. Which question is it that you're interested in answering?
So sarcastic Tessanisis asked, I gotta find some sources for what the average Egyptian did spirituality wise. Guess there's not a lot, but is there enough to build a practice? So the problem with our material from average Egyptians, there is one big roadblock to that, and that is literacy. Literacy in ancient Egypt was the privilege of an elite within an elite. Less than 3% of an elite of Egyptians were literate during the New Kingdom, according to Dr. John Baines, an Egyptologist who presented a paper on literacy in ancient Egypt. And so you have a scribal elite, which was a very privileged class in Egypt, and only they had access to sacred, to being fluent, and would have had any access to sacred text. Within the priesthood,
and there was a very specific function for that class as well, and it wasn't just talking about normal daily life.
No. The scribal class were very privileged in ancient Egypt and performed a specific function. But the nature of writing in ancient Egypt was not considered something that was a right or a prerogative that everybody could have. Writing in ancient Egypt was regarded as being potentially dangerous cosmically. Writing for the Egyptians was a magical act, that individual signs, we're talking hieroglyphs, what the Egyptians called the Medu Neter, which means the words of Neter, the divine speech, that these were potentially catastrophic representations. Writing itself could be very, very dangerous, that hieroglyphs were living, and that they actually had the potential to do harm. So writing was restricted in the priestly class, and common Egyptians were illiterate. It cannot even be substantiated that the royal family, that the king of Egypt himself would have been literate. There is slight evidence for that. So writing was very restricted. Most people who think of Egyptian priesthood, unless they're specialists, just assume that Egyptian priests and priestesses were literate people, but that is not true. They were not literate. There was only a very, very elite few within Egyptian priesthood that we know of were literate, and that would have had access to the holy rolls, which the daily cult rituals were on. So these were very, very restricted.
So because of that, a lot of what we know about daily practices is recorded, unfortunately, through the eyes of other cultures and from circumstantial evidence, like archaeological evidence. Because we get Greeks, funnily enough, talking a great deal about what the ancient Egyptians did, like with their culture and various beliefs from a Greek perspective through Interpretatio Graeca.
Right.
But you also get like what we can determine from archaeology, but of course that has the scholarship bias that we talk about so much on this channel. So it can be challenging, but there is information out there. It's just not direct written sources in the way that you get in, like, from Greece. It's not direct written sources from the horse's mouth, as it were.
Right. But what we can do, so what where my point was going is that creates a huge problem for us because we do not have the opinions and experiences of average Egyptians. But big but what we do have is a lot of ex voto material. We have stelae, we have potsherds, we have devotional offerings that were left by common Egyptians who were poor and who were not priestly and who were not from the scribal class. And we have a lot of that material. Now, where that material was left, such as the temple site that it was left at, and whether there was residue in it, a lot of it has residue. So we know what types of food offerings were being given. So if you study all of this material and you can put it together to see what a possible practice would have been like for average Egyptians, it is possible. But unfortunately, everything that you see, for example, in being written about by Comedics today, and that's been published by certain authors who publish Comedic rituals, the 99.99% of that material is material from an elite within an elite. It represents how the daily rituals were performed in the temples, which the common people did not have access to. And we have the state-sponsored festivals, which we have a lot of information on. And we have the daily rituals of the temple, which we have a great deal of information on. And they're very rich sources. However, how relevant was all of that to average Egyptians? Well, not exceptionally relevant to their daily life. It was relevant to them during festival times when they actually got to see some of the rituals being performed in the public courts of the temples, or when the cult images of the gods were brought out of the temples, such as the Festival of Opet or the beautiful festival of the Valley, where the cult images of the gods are brought out of the temples and the populace could actually see the ark shrines where the cult images were, and they could experience some of the rituals in the temples, because the priests would perform libations. They would perform rituals that were designed for the populace to be able to observe. They were not what was performed in the Holy of Holies, but they were adaptations from that. So if somebody today is wanting to reconstruct or revive a practice of what average Egyptians did, my advice to you would be to start with the kind of offerings that average Egyptians would do, which would be lighting an oil lamp for the god, burning incense for the god, pouring out libations on your household altar for the gods and for the ancestors. And you brought up ancestors. You brought this up. I just want to make a real brief comment, and that is, today as Comedics, obviously the majority of Comedics do not have Egyptian ancestry. When I talk about ancestors in my own practice, I'm talking about my own, either members of my family that have come before me, that have expressed that they're protectors of me. They've invited me to give them offerings, or have invited me to have that relationship with them, or they are ancient Egyptians, the spirits of ancient Egyptians who I feel a connection to that I feel have invited my cultists and have accepted my prayers. So the people who've come before me in ancient times, who've practiced, who've worshiped the same gods I'm worshiping, those people can be your ancestors. They can be my ancestors. If I make an offering to them, and if they acknowledge that, if I feel that they have received my offering and that they are inviting my engagement, even though we don't share blood, those people become my ancestors and part of my ancestor cultus. This is something that all Comedics I've ever talked to, they do. They have this practice. They worship their own ancestors that are from their physical lineage. And then they also worship and have relationships with the spirits of ancient Egyptians, because they have practiced the tradition that we're reviving today. So I just wanted to make that clarification there.
Okay. All right. So I told you all that I would show off the art sort of midway through the stream. We are an hour and 20 minutes in. So I want to again stress none of this artwork is mine. None of it belongs to me. This is all devotional artwork that was specifically submitted to me in a thread to show off in this stream for some of the absolutely just stunning stuff that we've got here. Everybody, I'm taking it on faith that you guys made the art that you gave me. But I'm about to show off just some absolutely beautiful artwork. And again, regardless of skill level, the act of creating itself is a dialogue with the divine. And I wanted to honor those of you that decided to submit evidence of your dialogues with the divine to show that off, because where would we be if we didn't show off some absolutely gorgeous artwork? And for those of you who are looking for Ptahmassu's artwork, again, links are in the description to all of his stuff. So if you guys are looking for that stuff, it is absolutely stunning. I've never seen anything like it. But I put all of it into a folder, and one of them, one of Beafeld's two, didn't show up properly in this, but we have Artemis, we have Apollon. This one was done by Michel Nismos, which is gorgeous, gorgeous work. We have all kinds of gorgeous submissions. Like, it is absolutely stunning. Just everything. This one, the artist kindly was able to allow our wonderful wine mom to be happy, because, you know, YouTube is, Dear Susan's a little bit overprotective with parts being showed off. But just look how stunning these works are. Just thank you all so much for being vulnerable enough to share them with us. This is absolutely beautiful as well. Like, I love this image. Also, again, by Michel Nismos. This apparently came to them in a dream, according to the description, and so did the other one of Apollon. So, absolutely amazing recording. We have, I believe this was Freya, or yeah, I believe this was Freya, and we have Loki here as well, which the artist said that they specifically tried to integrate both masculine and feminine aspects because of Loki's history as a shapeshifter, and also some of the myths surrounding the gender fluid nature of that particular deity. And then we have this here from Beafeld, which, you know, I love this. Beafeld has been working on a series of these. I have more of them that were just given to me privately, but I love the old style artwork. Like, it's really, really nice. And this is the most adorable thing I have ever seen in my life. Zeus and Hera, it's gorgeous. I love it. Like, this is just absolutely beautiful. So I wanted to show that off for you guys, because as a community, one of the things that we need to do is sort of honor each other's honoring of the gods, as it were. It was said that Goddess, which is itself reciprocity, I defined it in the video on reciprocity. There's a whole spiel that I give every time I talk about it. I will let you all watch the video to hear that again, because I quote it all the time, because it's one of the prettiest things I've ever written, but it's also very true. Charis is as much a community endeavor as it is individual. It is the whole of your relationship with the gods, the moment of offering itself, the joy you get from giving, the joy of the receipt of the gift, and the joy of receiving your gift back when the gods eventually give it to you. Because you don't give the gift in expectation of receipt, but when the receipt happens, it is in remembrance of gifts given. It's very hard to explain that you're not bribing the gods, but again, I did a much better job in that video. But when we're talking about that, as a community, we create. We are creating, actively crafting our communities, and we also are creating for ourselves our own relationships with the gods, our own self-expression, and honoring that, I think, is essential. That's why there's an art share channel in my Discord server. There's 3 of them, actually. There's one for knitted things called Ieargane, which honors specifically Athena in her aspect as Athena of the work. There's one called Your Art. There's a fan art channel, and there is also a channel called Modern Iodos for poetry and other forms of, like, prose written self-expression. Which I'm going to stress, guys, the written word, comedy, tragedy, performance art, that was all considered to be art. That is art. It is absolutely art. It is just as much art as what Ptahmassu does. It is just as much art as knitting, sewing, like weaving, cooking, all of that. And so I also went and pulled up the names of the 3 Musai, the 3 Titan muses, Melete, study or practice, Neme, memory, and Iode, song. So this was actually specifically Pausanias claimed that. Plutarch claimed that one of the Sicyonian muses was called Polymathea. And then you have, of course, the traditional 9 muses, which are cataloged by Hesiod. But the thing is, because of the presence of the 3 Titan muses, any form of self-expression, even those that do not appear as though they are covered by the 9 muses, are still a product of the Musai. They are still a product of the Titan muses, because all art is ultimately study and memory, right? It is ultimately your skill and the actual expression itself. It is still an aspect of those 3 beings. You are still having a conversation with them, even if what you're doing wouldn't fit under any of the old headers of what the Musai were said to represent. So when you're talking about these things being conversations with the divine, there is also the aspect of some of the reluctance in our community to, for lack of a better way to put it, support the artists that serve our communities. Now, I'm not talking about myself here, because I do art, but I don't consider the art that I do to be specifically divine. Most of the stuff that I sell is very much like useful pieces, though I do consider the act of creating it to be a divine act for all of the reasons that I've already outlined. But there are people like Ptahmassu, iconographers, there are people who create sacred art for others. And there is this attitude frequently that there is something wrong with them being compensated for their skill, for their effort, for all of the work that comes into it. And one of the things you will see me rant about at random, whatever it decides to piss me off again, because it's going to piss me off at random because it's still happening, like, you will see me rant about why it's wrong to be entitled and to demand these artists to work for free. Because it's not, just because you're serving a god does not mean you do not deserve compensation. It doesn't mean it's not skilled labor. It doesn't mean that you don't deserve to frickin' eat.
Absolutely.
So I will let you jump off from here, because I know this is a bugbear of yours.
Well, I've been vilified, really, and doxxed and threatened, and I mean, it's been people who feel entitled to something because it's spiritual, it's religious. So
you got cut out. You might want to repeat what you just, like, the last sentence that you just said.
I'm sorry. Okay. There are people who feel entitled to have what I'm doing because it is spiritual, it is religious. And there is somehow a misconception that if something is spiritual or religious, that just by virtue of you being born and breathing air and farting, that somehow you instantly get to have anything that's spiritual or religious because the gods are everywhere or the powers are everywhere. And so everything belongs to everyone. I am not one of those people. I think that there is so much privilege and entitlement in people today who want something without having to work for it. People who
now keep in mind, we're not talking about access to the traditions of worshiping the gods. We're talking about the physical objects that you create and demanding that they give you for free.
Absolutely. Not talking about traditions, not talking about the teachings or being able to participate in religious ceremonies or festivals or community events. I am talking about specialized craftspeople or specialized artists who are performing a service, that these things are not valued. These same people can go and spend thousands of dollars on their cosplay costumes and have no problem doing that.
Oh, but don't worry. There are people that are entitled even in that sphere. There have been people, like I have cosplay artist friends who have actually passively aggressively sent a box of materials to somebody who has bitched them out for charging more than what they think the cost of materials would be for creating something, because the labor and skill of the artist was not taken into account.
Right. So the position that I come from is twofold. I understand that there is a huge pushback, and understandably so, against capitalism and against anything that smacks of capitalism. And that is a rant that's not appropriate here. But I understand.
But to repeat
that anger.
But to repeat the meme, we live in a society.
Yes, we you know what? I have to pay I have to make a car payment. I have to pay for medical services.
You have to pay for all those offerings that you give when you open the mouth for the ritual to create these icons.
Right. But even just in daily life, I have the same concerns as anyone here. We all have the same concerns, the same bills, and the same life struggles as far as how to put food on the table and how to take care of members of our family when they get sick, how to afford medical care, or your car breaks down and having to make the decision between, do I eat this month, pay the gas and electric bill, or do I pay this hospital bill, or fix my car so that I can get to the grocery store, or whatever. We all know what it is like to struggle and fight with those things. And when you are a creator or a craftsperson or an artist, and you want to be able to devote yourself to your calling, the only viable way to do that, if you want to do that full time, is that you can financially sustain it. And that's vital. Obviously, you have to do that. If I wasn't financially sustaining my work, I would be working full time for some big, powerful, hungry corporation, making somebody else money, and I would not have time or energy to be an iconographer, because my work as an iconographer is an extension of my priesthood, and it requires an entire lifestyle of commitment, and that takes time. It takes dedication to do. And as you mentioned, yes, all of my icons, the process of creating a cult image from a Kemetic point of view involves not just the mouth opening ritual at the end of the process, but prayer and pilgrimage. I go out of state to visit certain mountains and visit certain sacred bodies of water to perform rituals and empowerments for images while they are being created. So all of that expense is something that I have to undertake if the deity asks for it. So if the deity asks that I go to a certain river or mountain or stream to make certain offerings and bring the icon in progress, that's what I do. That's what my household supports. All of the tools that I use for the mouth opening ritual, you can't perform the mouth opening ritual without tools that are made out of very specific instruments and very specific materials and specific standards. I have a complete set made out of authentic materials, made exactly the way they were made thousands of years ago, the cost of which is more than a luxury vehicle. That over the years, I have built up this collection so that I would have the appropriate ritual tools to be able to open these images. And the mouth opening ritual itself requires a very expensive offering rite, in which a huge, copious quantity of food offerings and floral offerings and expensive offerings made out of very expensive materials are offered to the deity. It's what the gods require. It is my responsibility to follow through with giving the deity whatever it is that they want so that they enter this image and possess it. And that is very expensive. So, not to mention the materials I use, which are the most precious materials.
Well, and for people
planet.
who are worried that you might in any way be grifting, you put up photos of these things regularly as you're working on. Like anybody who follows you on Twitter, which if you don't follow Ptahmassu on Twitter, go follow Ptahmassu on Twitter. If you are a positive person, which the people in my live chat are, you guys are wonderful. I love my community. Check out his Twitter. It is such a beautiful inspiration. He posts progress photos as he's working on the icons. He posts pictures of his devotional work and his offerings that he gives for like during the process. Like giant carpet spread out with everything from like watermelons to flowers. It is gorgeous. It is inspiring. He also posts regularly reminders that some of us need to hear about the focus of our work and the purpose of it. Like it is wonderful. You guys should really check out his stuff. But like if anybody ever worried that you were just making this up and just giving an excuse, oh no, you have proof of exactly what you go through for a lot of these things. Like some of it's behind the scenes because some of it's not meant for like public viewing, but a lot of it is, and you do share a lot of it
on my blog is also a place where I document my process, at least all of the aspects that I am allowed to photograph and allowed to show. My clients, my patrons who sponsor the creation of cult images and pay for them, they pay me a lot of money and they know exactly what I'm doing. I write very detailed reports for my clients. They receive pictures every single day, often, of exactly what I'm doing. The people who commission me, they have important communities of their own. They're priests, they're priestesses, they're spiritual leaders in various traditions. These are smart people. They know the fakers, they know people who are taking advantage, and then they know the real people. The people who come to me, they know ahead of time. They know exactly who I am. They know exactly how I operate. They know what they're getting out of the process, and they're getting a huge amount. In fact, when it comes out, basically, financially, I'm still making less than minimum wage for what I do. After the materials are paid for, after everything is paid for, my actual profit, I'm making hourly less than minimum wage, people. So, and I would add another thing. My business is I pay taxes on everything. So my business with the IRS, with state and federal, I pay taxes on every single thing that I do. I keep business records. And so it is a business, and I am paying my taxes. So as a creator, I reserve the right to charge whatever I want for my services. And if somebody wants my services, they're going to pay me what I ask. And obviously, if they don't agree, then you don't have the service and you don't pay me. But I do want to say, from my tradition, comedically speaking,
We actually have a question on this topic very briefly. So for people who don't have all the proper tools, can they open the mouths of their own statues, and do the gods not inhabit their statues?
Okay, I'll try to be succinct, because this is a great question. Love this question. I don't myself encourage people, lay people, or people who are beginning in comedicism, people who do not have the time and resources to take care of the gods in an awakened statue. I do not, and never do, endorse that they open a statue. Opening a statue, having an awakened cult statue, is like having a baby. You have to be able to afford all of the offerings and the upkeep that deity requires. It's every single day. You have to have time to perform the right rituals for that deity, which means the daily ritual. So lay people who, I'm a priest. I know the ancient Egyptian language. I have access to the original texts. So I perform the daily ritual, and I perform it according to how it should be performed. And I have the material resources. 10% of my household income goes to supporting the deities. And that is not coming from my work. That is coming from my spouse's job. That's coming from our own income, our own out-of-pocket expense for supporting our deities, for in maintaining the holy images. So this is not something that just general comedics or lay people can do. And there's something more important, is that a lot of comedics think that they have to have an awakened statue in order to make offerings to the gods, and this is not true. Awakened statues are only for temple situations. They are for specific shrines. They're for specific services. And they are not something that lay people should have in their homes, for the reasons that I outlined, because it requires a massive amount of material support, as well as time, as well as is understanding the right rituals and understanding how to perform them. You can
So in other words, much like with the Hellenic, if you have statues on your altar, the gods can come down and inhabit those statues briefly enough to prevent an offering. It's not the same thing as having an awakened statue.
Exactly. I have a household altar aside from our temple room, which is a separate, an entire room where the awakened cult statues are. We have a shrine to the household gods in the front of our house. And this has all of our main deities on it, and it's where we do morning prayers and throughout the day pour libations and light incense. The statues that are on the household shrine are not awakened cult statues, because they are in the public part of the house, and they are part of our everyday life. So standards of purity, as far as them being involved in present where daily activities and cooking and coming and going through the front door. So awakened cult statues are not present on our household shrine. But the gods, absolutely, when I make an offering, I know that the gods are coming there to receive the offering. They're hearing my prayers. The temple room is for formal rites and rituals only, and for formal ritual events, as well as magical practices that are formal and not just part of my everyday talking to the gods and my everyday devotion. So as far as to answer the question specifically, my own opinion as a priest is that the opening of the mouth ceremony is a recipe. It is a very specific magical formula of ritual actions that have to be performed in very specific ways according to very specific standards of purity. And by people who have taken very specific steps to ensure their ritual purity and who the gods approve of to perform the ceremony. The materials that are used, all of the tools such as the Ptahmassu blades, which are obsidian, bifurcated obsidian blades, they must be made of a certain type of obsidian, and they have to be made under certain circumstances. All of these things are vital. So in my opinion, it's not appropriate to try and perform the opening of the mouth ceremony on just any statue and to do it without the appropriate tools. I don't feel that's respectful to the gods or to the cultural ethos that the tradition comes from. I think that you would need to wait until you feel that you have educated yourself and you feel that you have all of the appropriate ingredients, as well as you don't need to have an awakened cult statue unless you are a priest, unless you have a temple room and you have a temple facility. Other than that, there is no reason as a Kemetic to have an awakened cult statue. But it certainly is disrespectful, I think, to the gods to awaken a cult statue and then not be able to maintain it or care for it. And I don't feel that most lay people are in a position to do that.
Well, and I'm going to stress that keep in mind, this is one tradition, like one perspective from one priest within one particular tradition. There are other opinions. If you're interested in the discourse around this, feel free to research it. This is just a very, very strong Reconstructionist perspective as well.
Well, actually, okay. So yeah, what you said is true. I am in no way saying that I'm this big authority and that I'm coming across as my way is the one right way for all Kemetics. I'm giving my opinion based on having devoted my entire life and my livelihood to performing these rituals and to doing the service. But in no way do I represent even a fraction of Kemetics. Richard J. Reedy wrote a book called Eternal Egypt. He was a peer of mine. He's unfortunately passed over, but he was a peer of mine and a teacher of mine. And in Eternal Egypt, he presents the opening of the mouth ritual. He presents one English translation of it, which is very, very good. And he presents a very great authoritative text that can be understood by anyone, whether they're a layperson or a priest, and to understand how the mouth opening ritual can be performed. And so there are many opinions and many perspectives. What I do is not because I think that my way is the right way. It's because this is what my gods have directed me to do as an individual to serve them. That if I want to,
it's your relationship with your gods. It's your perspective. Which anybody that I'm just going to say, anybody that I bring on my channel to talk about things is speaking from their perspective. Like, I want to have a plurality of opinions and traditions on this channel in general. Like, I want to support a plurality of people and traditions within polytheistic, polytheistic revivalism. We brought on Celery, who had a different perspective on this particular question a while back when I was still doing the Xenia Bridge show. So if you guys want a different perspective, there is actually a discussion of that. And Celery's Garden is an excellent YouTube channel. Check it out. It's really cool. It's really, really good information there. But when you're talking about this, there's a plurality of perspectives within Kemeticism. Ptahmassu does a very specific calling between him and his gods. I do a very specific calling between me and mine, which is why I say I am not a priest. I'm an educator. It's a very different role. But Chelidorius, who we brought on last week, is founding a mystery tradition that is open to all, but most likely not for everyone. And he does not consider himself a priest either, but he is a facilitator of this mystery tradition. So there is a room in polytheism, and this is where I want to come back briefly to the quad omni question, this is where a plurality of beliefs and deities and traditions can exist respectfully and all coexist and still be right for the individuals practicing them within polytheism, because historically that was the case. These gods interact with us on a community level and on an individual level, and that results in a plurality of traditions and beliefs and practices. So if, for example, you want cultic statues and don't have thousands of dollars to purchase an opened one from Ptahmassu, you can either create your own or find others from other places. You don't necessarily have to invest that unless you want the specific service that he is providing.
Absolutely. And I would like to also say that as a polytheist, above everything that I do, I'm a polytheist. I believe in polycentricity and I believe in pluralism. And I believe that one of the great benefits of polytheism is that we can have multitudes of approaches, even within the same temple, within the same group, within the same spiritual family. If we develop one, we can have a multitude of perspectives, even for the same practice, and none of them cancel the others out. They can all be right at the same time. And what I would say to anyone is, if you're a Kemetic and your deity, your nature is directing you to open a statue for them, listen to your deity. Don't listen to what I say. Don't listen to what an academic says. Don't listen to what anyone else is telling you. If your deity is giving you clear signs that they want an awakened statue and that you're to do it, then do it and serve your deity. I always tell people, listen to the gods, listen to your deities. I can give you advice. I can try and clarify. I can tell you what my practice is, but I am not an authority. I am a practitioner. I'm a servant of the gods, and I'm not positioning myself as an authority for all Kemetics or even for people who might want to work with me and be part of my guild. Everyone is entitled to their own practice and to their own perspective. And that's the wonder of polytheism, is that none of us have to be threatened by another perspective. They all can be equally true. So I can only tell people what my deities have indicated to me that they want strictly from me and from my service. What they tell you and what they tell someone else is going to be different. It's going to be based on your own dynamic with the deities and how your service is going to engage your gods personally.
And also the particular tradition or sub-tradition that you practice. For example, somebody who practices Common Hellenism, which is the tradition that more or less is formed if you watch the totality of the work on my channel under that header, and will eventually be the tradition that I will be publishing a book about. I'm calling it a very specific thing because I'm reconstructing a specific era and area, and there is admittedly, and I've admitted this specifically in my videos, some UPG elements to my practice, because there naturally is going to be. As a revivalist, UPG is essential. These are living conversations, living relationships with the gods. It's not just about the authoritative hammer of history. These gods are beings with agency. If you are not an atheopagan who believes specifically that they are, say like Jungian archetypes of some kind or some part of the subconscious or simply like symbolic, if you believe that these are living, breathing beings, so to speak, breathing being metaphorical here, with agency, if you believe the gods are active in your life, then your relationship with them is going to be different, unique, no matter what tradition you're practicing, from anyone else's. It's going to be unique because of the nature of the evolution of your practice and your relationship with that person. In the same way that, for example, Ptahmassu and I and Telidorius were all friends, but my relationship with Ptahmassu is different than Telidorius's relationship with Ptahmassu, and my relationship with Telidorius is different than his relationship with Telidorius. They're both the same person, but the kind of friendship that we've built is based on us as individuals and the interactions and focuses that we have and how those play off of each other. So one person may be closer to Athena in her warlike aspect, and another may be closer, say, as I am, in her of the work, Irgani aspect. Some may feel closer to her, say, a diplomat might be far more closer to her in her role as Sotera, savior of the city, or as a diplomat. And there is room for those perspectives, honoring the gods as individuals within polytheism. This is why I tend to not like seeing like large people and like large groups refer to specific beliefs and practices as miasmic, because of the fact that we don't know what relationship each person has with those gods. Now, granted, I will refer to certain things as miasmic on this channel from a historical perspective, because from my tradition's perspective, that's what they are. For example, blood offerings, human blood offerings, don't do that. Like within like the particular tradition of Hellenism, that is like there are specific prohibitions about human blood being spilt in temples and sacred areas, specifically about that. Like there's a ton of documented stuff on that. As a reconstructionist or revivalist, technically is more what I am. Like that is a prohibition. I will never offer blood. However, there might be somebody whose gods they feel ask them to do that. I'm not necessarily going to condone it within my own practice. If you are at my altar, I would ask you don't do that. But I'm not going to tell that person. There's no way that I can tell that person you can't do it. It's just I don't think you should. But that's my opinion. And that's one of the beautiful things about polytheism is there's room for alternate perspectives. As long as you're not harming yourself or others directly, a plurality of perspectives and traditions is a strength of these movements, of the Reconstructionist movements.
And I want to say though, because I think maybe because of you mentioned Reconstructionism in context to what I was in reference to what I was saying about the mouth opening ritual. I do not consider myself a Reconstructionist. I consider myself a revivalist, which is a rabbit hole discussion.
Same as me.
I won't get into because that's totally off topic. But I am not a Reconstructionist.
Hey, there's no reason you can't come back on the channel sometime in the future.
Oh, if your community wants me, I'd be more than happy to come back whenever you want to invite me on. I certainly am at your disposal if you want me. So that would be great. But I consider myself a revivalist. What I've had to do in my practice is take what is there in the records that we have, and then through UPG, through my own development of an oracular or divinatory practice and dream incubation and other ways in which I've entered into an agreement with my deities that they can guide me through these systems, putting all that together to create a praxis, to create a practice that will allow myself to have right relationship with my gods. And that really, at the end of the day, is what I hope everyone does, is establish right relationship with your deities, which is a very personal relationship. And it's not my responsibility or my right to tell or infer to anyone else what their right relationship with their deities can be. I can only give advice based on my experience. If someone asks me a direct question, I will answer from my experience. However, you have to ultimately make that decision based on what you know is coming from your gods and where you're being led. And that might be very different from myself. And in ancient Egypt, we have to keep in mind that not only do we have over 4,000 years of documentation, which has survived, a lot of it largely intact, but we have to consider all of the different towns and localities that had their own town gods and their own town cultists. And even throughout Egypt's major temples, cults changed radically. And
I mean, even just in terms of epithets, there were many that were only ever spoken aloud within family traditions or neighborhood traditions that we've lost entirely to time. But, you know, there were also personal epithets that were specific to individual people that were given to them by their gods that we have documentation of, which proves that gods can reveal individual aspects to themselves that are specific to their relationship with an individual person, which means this is one of the reasons why there's an ongoing conversation. And I plan on doing a video on this at some point, but your UPG is absolutely and can be, if you have it, authoritative to you. Now, granted, I know there are mind-blind people who either block themselves from being able to understand their experiences with the gods or simply just do not pick up on them.
Right.
where they're incapable of it. There's a bunch of different theories about mind blindness. There are
Right.
people who have never recognized a divine experience, and those people still have a valid practice. You can still establish a relationship with the gods. You have to be a lot more careful, I guess, about paying attention to when your blessings and things occurs, like when that cycle of reciprocity is very active in your life. But if you don't notice a direct divine experience, you still have a completely valid practice. But when you're
Absolutely.
talking about revivalism, when you're talking about relationships, regardless, UPG, if you have it, can be absolutely authoritative for you. It's most likely not authoritative for everybody, but the stuff that is useful for the community, things like say the mental health SPG that builds up and builds up and builds up with Aries, that will become a part of the community's collective experience in the same way that some epithets to the gods were said in more than one location. Some festivals were celebrated panhellenically, right? Like, that is something that is possible. And in our revived traditions, in our revived communities, that's part of the reason why sharing is so essential, because these patterns only emerge when we share and support each other, and when we stop going out of our way to judge things from an orthodoxic perspective. Now, there's a distinct difference between cruel orthodoxy and calling out behaviors that are negative. And like,
Right.
I've done expose videos on leaders in the community that have
Yes.
done some horrendous shit.
Mhm.
I do my research before I do them. I'm not being a hypocrite here. They are harming, like, the people that I've done videos are actively harming their communities.
Absolutely.
And there are some beliefs and practices that cause harm to the communities. I have banned people from my own community for harmful beliefs and practices and claims that could hurt the wider community, just in general. But
Absolutely.
a lot of the time, I have seen a lot of people judge completely harmless beliefs and practices. I have seen people get attacked for talking about Dionysos really liking gummy bears. That is completely harmless. That is obviously something that came about as a result of that person's practice. Does it apply to the entire community? No, but why would you disparage that person for their individual experience? For all you know, 5 to 10 people, if you hadn't mocked that person, might have come out and talked about the same thing, and we might actually get an SPG experience that's wide enough to realize that maybe gummy bears are an offering that Dionysos really likes in the modern day. We have no way to know that if people get judged and shamed before they can openly share.
Absolutely. And what I always do, and I'm very careful in my own work, is to say what is UPG, to say what is something I personally have experienced, I believe is divinely guided or steered. I'm very clear about what's UPG. And then I'm also very clear with my sources as far as where my historical information is coming from, where my theology is coming from, where my ritual practices are coming from. I can distinguish those things. But the gods are the gods exist. They are alive, they are dynamic, they are fluid, and they are engaging human beings right now in the 21st century as much as they ever were in ancient times. And the way in which the gods interact with us today in our circumstances in which we
That gave me a chuckle. I'm sorry, I had to pop it
no,
up.
I see. How dare you suggesting that you're like Chaiti? Well, actually, some of them do. And in fact,
See, that's my point exactly, right
and
there.
part of our daily practice here is that because, for example, coffee is something that my household loves, and we do invest. You know, we buy really good beans, we buy really good coffee. It's part of our it's part of our household goods. It represents something that's important to our household. So every single day, the very first cup of coffee is poured out for the god Pita in this very special porcelain and gold little set that I have for him, and it is offered to him and then the household gods as a respect of, this is a commodity that my household values. You've given us this, and now I give it back to you to start our day. And that's a very powerful thing. They didn't have coffee in ancient Egypt. Why?
How dare?
We're
How
not.
dare you do something so ahistorical, Ptahmassu? You're
Yeah,
banned. You're
but
banned.
guess
It's
what?
miasmic.
Right, I know. Well, I hate to break it to people, but we're not in ancient Egypt right now. I hate to tell you that, Comedics, but this is the 21st century, not the 18th dynasty. And the gods are here and now, and they are going to respond to the very best of what you bring to them. So if
Which
what
is
your
part of the
house
reason why devotional offerings are so powerful, to bring everything back, because we have gone off on a massive half an hour long tangent.
Yep.
But That's part of why devotional offerings are so powerful in the first place, because what is the thing that, number one, no matter what your financial situation is, in the 21st century, in the majority of the countries that would be tuning in to a broadcast like this, for the folks that would largely like make up this community, what is the thing, the resource that is most at the premium, the most expensive thing that you could possibly give? It is your time.
Right. Our time. Our time, and that is so valuable to the gods, because our time as humans is finite. We're mortals. We have a limited span of time. And so when we take that time and we offer it to our gods, it is a very powerful form of religious engagement. And that's something that in my household, our time is often what we offer our gods, whether it's stopping to pour a libation or to burn incense, just to offer a prayer, to speak to the gods at the household shrine, and to include them in our meals by offering them a portion of the food that we eat. These little activities are actually really powerful, and there's something that every single person can do. You don't have to be a priest. You don't have to have expensive things. You don't need all the expensive accoutrements to worship the gods, to serve them in your daily life. Use what you have and give that with your finest intentions, what you've got, the very best way that you can. And the gods will exalt that, and they will grant you boons in return.
So, I think that that is a powerful place to end. We touched on the majority of the things we wanted to cover. Of course, there's still room for a follow-up stream. We barely got to touch on the devotional of the written word. We barely got to touch on the power of things like sacred poetry.
Yeah.
Which, you know, we barely got to touch on that because we're hitting 2 hours, and I want to make sure that folks actually watch this stream, because when we get much more than that, folks have a harder time. So, you know, we're definitely, let me know down in the comments if you're watching this on the playback, or even if you're in the live chat, even if you posted in the live chat just now, after this broadcast is over, please let me know down in the comments if you want me to bring Ptahmassu on to continue this conversation, to talk about things like the devotion of the written word, to talk about things about the physical process of art and artistic ecstasy, because we started to touch on all of that, but this is such a broad topic. We talked for literally 7 hours and barely touched on it, like the first time that we had an extended conversation. So if you guys want to continue this, like, let me know down in the comments, and we will absolutely set up another interview which works for both of us. But we are in the shill portion of the stream. We are in the portion of the stream where we show off all the stuff that we're doing. Ptahmassu, you have talked 2 or 3 times. You have teased us, as you will, with your glorious like book.
I'm a tease.
Let's talk about the teasing that you've been doing this entire stream about this new book that you just put out there, which I ordered my copy of last night, but it hasn't gotten here yet, so I can't review it. I will, if you want me to, I can do a review of the video at some point. Maybe we can even do an interview about it specifically. But tell us a little bit about what it is that I just bought.
Well, I would love to do a video specifically about sacred verses. So when you have a chance to read it, we could do an entire video just about that. Sacred verses was written in 2016. I know it's 2021. So what the hell was I doing with it? It's an initiatic work. And it began with a very, very personal initiatic experience that I was going through, and was never intended for publication initially. This reveal this is about, oh, somebody.
It was a super chat. I was chuckling because that's a reference to my video on Heracles, where I little bit, I don't know if you've actually seen that one, because I know you're still going through my channel, but there's a reference in there to the quote unquote only Greek myth I've ever read that has a happy ending to it. Like an actual happy ending. Like the people loved each other so much, it involved Heracles, that they stayed together at the end, got turned into a story of infidelity, revenge, and cheating by Disney. And it made me mad because, like, in order to try to sanitize the Heracles story, they turned the one happy thing into, well, all the cheating, cautionary tale stuff, like with Megara, and it made me mad. So that is a 4 layers deep of channel lore is what that is right there. And that's why it made me laugh. So
sacred verses, which is, you can consider that religious poetry, you can consider that ecstatic poetry. It comes from the experience we didn't really get to actually dive into, which ecstasy, and being directly touched by our gods and having that experience that we only can define as ecstasy. But sacred verses is an initiatory journey in which the reader is taken through very, very profound visualizations and experiences that allows them to connect with their gods in ways that transform them, touch them, and give them gnosis. It is not a Kemetic text, by the way. There are some Kemetic elements that are very minor in certain of the verses, but it is not a Kemetic text. People will be very surprised at how much, at the majority of the work, which does not have anything to do with Kemeticism, the experience happened as it did. I felt guided. I felt led, not just by Kemetic deities, but by other deities and powers. And the book is very profound. But it is very personal. So initially, I absolutely in no way intended to publish it. And it was not until I really received definitely guidance that it was acceptable for me to publish it. And then through friends, as well as Edward Butler, Dr. Edward Butler, who was very kind enough to help me decide to publish it. And then he did the foreword for the book. But Edward Butler really was the one that kind of jabbed me hard and said, you know what, you need to publish this. People need to read this. And so he kind of deserves credit ultimately for me publishing it, because I had decided I wasn't going to. And that's why it's taken me this long, because I really kept vacillating. Yes, I am going to publish. No, I'm not. And Edward really said, this is important and people need this. So I do hope that the people who get this book, I would like to hear their experiences. I would like to hear what happens to you if these are also, by the way, and it is explained in my introduction to the book, but these are also magical utterances. So they are spells. There are songs, they're chants, but they are also spells. And so I'm very interested to hear how people interact with
Q screaming from the oh no, all spell work is Guesha, all of it is hubris crowd. Like,
oh my gosh,
they're probably
really?
lost if they're here. They're probably lost if they're here right now, but like, cure all of the anger from that particular contingent of the Hellenist community. They got mad at me when I did my video on magic.
Yeah, I'm aware of that. Well, in the tradition that I come from, magic is part and parcel of our engagement of the gods, and our engagement of the gods is magic itself. So that has no bearing on me. It's not hubris, and it's not miasmic. So put that in a pipe and smoke it. My book,
this is why I love you, by the way.
Among many other reasons to love me. If I might be so unhumble, I'm very lovable. I am very lovable. And I want people to get that. If you get nothing else from my work or from this discussion or from sacred verses from my book, that you get that the gods are here and that we can love the gods and that we can engage them and that they can engage us as much as we engage them. And that experience is about loving the gods and being devoted and giving our very best. And that is ultimately, at the end of the day, what my entire message is. And I hope that people get that through my work and through my book.
I'm going to add the extra angry, like, Hellenist emphasis of your experiences are valid. Your interpretation of them might need some work when you first start building your relationships with the gods, but your UPG experiences are valid, and you will learn more and more as time goes on what things you may have misinterpreted early on, what they ultimately mean. Like, it is a journey. Journey implies a destination, it implies a path, and unfortunately our journeys are messy and chaotic because that's the life that we have. We're humans, we're flawed, we're screwed up. These incredible, glorious beings that have existed through all time, through all history, that have, like, deigned to touch upon us for reasons that I have talked about many, many times, like, for a myriad of reasons that we will never fully understand as evolved beings that are not, like, bodiless, unevolved minds that exist within the universe that have existed through eternity. Like, there are concepts to us that seem to fascinate them, and vice versa. They build relationships with us. And the ultimate focus of everything we do ultimately comes down to those experiences, if you have them, and how meaningful they are to you. And if you're mind blind and you don't, your practice is still valid. That is still a relationship. But if you have those experiences, it is natural to doubt yourself, but stop it anyway, because it's your interpretation that may or may not be off. The experience itself is valid. And fear of, like, mental health issues and things should not be a reason to completely discount your divine experiences. And fear of losing divine experiences is not a reason that you shouldn't seek mental health treatment if you're concerned that you have a disorder that causes delusions. Either way, Ultimately, the gods work through and with us.
Yes.
And that is beautiful. We have relationships with them. That's what we are building. That's what Goddess is. That's what right relations in Kemeticism is. That's what the purpose of Reconstruction, Revivalism, Eclecticism, that is what we were called to. And it's so easy to forget that when we get lost in the myriad of discourse. But ultimately, that is what it's all about. That is what it always will be about. That is what we are building these communities for. That is what my work is for, and that's what Ptahmassu's work is for.
The gods love us. And the gods want to engage. If the gods did not care about us, and if they did not want to engage, then we would not have thousands and thousands of years from all different cultures and all parts of the globe. We would not have very well documented monuments, ex votos, and experiences that have been recorded by people who've had these interactions and answered prayers. The gods answer our prayers. They do engage. They want to engage. I think the gods very much enjoy the engagement. The gods do not need us, and that's a different discussion. We have nothing the gods need. The gods do not need us. The gods pre-exist the human condition. The gods pre-exist the creation of the world. So they don't need us. But I think they do want to have these interactions with us. And that's a huge
If they didn't, they wouldn't have to. It's not as though we force it just by trying to interact with them. I could go call your phone 50 times right now if I wanted to, and you don't have to pick up. It would be annoying, but you don't have to pick up. And the gods don't have to answer either, but they do.
Yeah, absolutely. And isn't it a privilege? Isn't it amazing that we can actually have relationships with these beings that are older than our planet, or with beings that the same gods that were worshipped 5,000 years ago or thousands of years ago, that we can actually talk to these same deities today. We can actually be loved by them. We can actually receive enrichment from them. It blows my mind. It blows my mind. And I love my gods. The only reason that I'm doing the work that I do is because I love my gods, and service to the gods itself is a reward and a fulfillment. And to me, it's all about service. And everything that we do, anything we do, can be a form of service, not just temple things, not just structured, not just the fancy things, but like I was talking about earlier with washing the dishes or walking the dog or doing a household project, planting a garden, any of our endeavors, we can experience the gods while we're doing that activity, and we can dedicate our efforts and in our daily life, we dedicate that to our gods. And I think that's very powerful.
Well, and not only does it deepen our understanding of the gods, but it deepens our appreciation for those activities themselves. It's reciprocal. Reciprocity is at the core of all of it. And that is the note that I need to end on. As far as what I'm doing this week, the answer is fuck all. Because what I'm going to be doing is being on the phone with the insurance agencies and dealing with adjusters and dealing with mitigation and listening to the very loud power tools that will be dismantling my basement, more or less, and breaking down all of the things that got soaked by the flood. So the answer is this week, I am not going to be putting out a video. The Thanksgiving video is going to be delayed another week. I will be doing that video. The script is most of the way done, on specifically Indigenous figures through history that either made major contributions to culture and art or made major contributions to Indigenous rights. I'm going to be focusing on the Americas and Canada, but I got some suggestions from some other places from a few folks. So far, I have 7 historical figures that I'm looking at. There might be more, but I want to at least get them done because I find their stories to be particularly compelling. And I want that video to be a jumping off point for your own research. I'm going to briefly cover them like you would see in like a listicle type article, kind of talking a little bit about the significant contributions they made. But as I've said a million times, you can't capture all of Hellenic history in a single video. You can't capture the sea in a single drop or stick it in a goblet, and it's much the same for people's lives. All of these I will be linking resources to in the description of that video, but that won't be coming out until next week. So with that in mind, thank you guys all for being the supportive, amazing community that you are. Thank you all for tuning in. Thank you all for the submissions of your absolutely stunning artwork. Every single one of you, even those of you who might feel that your artwork is less polished or unfinished. No, it is beautiful. Thank you so much for being vulnerable and sharing it with both of us. Thank you for sharing your devotion, your votive offerings, your passion and love for the gods. That is stunning and beautiful, and getting to share it with the community was an honor and a privilege, and I thank you so much for your submissions and for getting them to me before the stream started, because I really appreciate all of the work that you guys put into getting those things done. So thank you all again. Thank you, Ptahmassu, for coming on. It looks like we're getting calls for an encore. We'll see what the comments say after the folks that weren't here live get to have a hack at it. But I hope that this enlightened all of you to what I was talking about in my video, how to go deeper in your relationship with the gods, what I sort of teased at, because we just started to get into some of the theology around art being a conversation with the divine. But anybody who ever tries to tell you that your experiences are invalid or that your art is worth less just because it might not look as skilled as somebody else's, remember that theologically, they're freaking wrong, and the ancients will tell them as much. So thank you guys again, and remember, we're stronger together.